The world called Earth had no god, and so the brood choir of Soren marked it for the feast. High Devourer Maelis Corin read the survey scroll one final time before the 800 ships of the Hunger Fleet broke from the dark between stars. The scroll was old. It was honest. It said that the third world of a small yellow sun held water, air, soft warm meat, and not one weapon worth the name. No war god slept beneath its seas. No hymn of broken empires hung in its sky. The humans, the scroll said, had ships, yes, but slow ones, few ones. Ships that carried grain and ore and tired colonists from one wet rock to another. They had never burned a fleet. They had never humbled a power. They had never even been tested. A world without a god, in the faith of the brood, was a world that begged to be eaten. Maelis Corin believed this with the whole of his long gray body. He had believed it for 900 years, and in 900 years the belief had never once cost him a single hull. It was not a hope. It was a law, as fixed as the cold of the deep dark, as certain as the slow turning of the milk tides in the nursery seas of Soren, where the young ships were grown. The brood choir did not conquer. Conquest was for lesser hungers, for empires that wanted thrones and tribute and the bending of knees. The brood consumed. Where it passed, worlds became cradles for the next generation of the living ships, and the meat of the old owners became the milk that fed the brood, and the cities became hollow shells in which the new eggs were laid in their warm rows. Soren had eaten 40 worlds this way. Each one had been promised a god to save it, in the hopeful old stories that every soft species seemed to tell itself in the dark, and each one had learned, in the end, that its god was only a story. The brood ate stories slowest of all, and savored them most, because a story took the longest to die. So Maelis Corin gave the order, and the Hunger Fleet opened its mouths, and the long fall toward the small yellow sun began. He had crossed the deep dark 1,000 times, but the leaving of it never lost its weight. One moment there was only the black between the stars, cold and starless and absolute, the place where the brood crossed the impossible distances by folding the dark around itself, the way a body folds around a wound. The next, the small yellow sun bloomed ahead, and the choir came back into the lit universe in good order, exactly where the holy mathematics of the crossing said it would, because the brood always came in good order. There was no scattering, no straggling, no fleet spread thin and ragged across light hours. 800 living hulls arrived as one, in one breath, in one place, and that alone had ended wars on 3 of the 40 worlds, the simple terror of a whole sky filling at once. The ships of the brood were not built. They were grown. Each one was a vast ridged thing of living shell and slow muscle, dark as a wound, and inside each one slept 1,000,000 eggs and a hunger that never closed its eyes. The smallest was a mile from snout to tail. The largest, the cathedral beast that carried Maelis Corin himself, was 11 miles of breathing armor, ridged and barbed and ancient, scarred with the milk marks of 40 feasts, and it sang as it moved through the dark. The song was the choir. Every ship in the Hunger Fleet shared one throat and one will, and the will was Maelis Corin's. When he was glad, 800 living hulls warmed in the cold. When he was hungry, 800 mouths flexed open in the same heartbeat. When he was certain, and he was always certain, the certainty ran through every hull like blood through one great body, and not one ship doubted, because there was no separate self in any of them left over to do the doubting. It had never failed him. A shared mind cannot panic, the brood taught, because there is no second voice inside it to be afraid, no whisper in the dark to take root and spread. A fleet of separate captains could break and scatter and rout. The choir could not break, because it had nothing to break apart into. It was one. That was the whole of the faith, and the whole of the strength, and for 900 years and 40 worlds it had been enough, and more than enough. Below them, the third world turned slow and blue and silent, and Maelis Corin looked down at it the way a hungry thing looks at a table set and waiting. He searched the world with the long senses of his cathedral beast, the senses that could read the heat of a city and the wash of a reactor, and the slow electric murmur of living minds across the cold of a whole system. He found everything the scroll had promised, and the finding was a pleasure in itself. He found the cities, soft and bright, scattered across the land masses like spilled embers cooling on a dark hearth. He found the ships, slow and few, Exactly as the scroll had said, fat, clumsy haulers and lean little couriers, and a handful of patrol cutters too small to matter, and not one armored prow among them, not one weapon port, not one hull built for anything but carrying and trading and the small soft business of a world that had never been afraid. He found the murmur of billions of warm minds going about their warm lives, never once looking up, never once afraid, a whole species asleep in the open. He found no war god, he found no sleeping fleet beneath the seas, though he searched the deeps the way the brood always searched, for that was where the soft worlds liked to hide their last hopes. He found nothing under the blue water but cold and pressure, and the slow, blind things that lived there. He found a species that had never been forced, not once in all its short and crowded history, to learn what it could truly do. He felt something then, that the brood did not have a clean word for. The closest word in the grown glyphs was joy, and even that was too small for it. It was the joy of the eater who has found a feast laid out and unguarded. It was the joy of a certainty about to be rewarded one more time, of a law about to prove itself again, of 900 years of being right, about to be right once more. It was, if the brood had owned the deeper word, something very close to peace. Sing the descent, he told the choir, and the choir sang. The 800 ships drew in toward the blue world in a slow tightening spiral, the way the brood always came, because the slowness was part of the feast, and the spiral was holy. The brood did not strike from ambush like a common predator. It came in the open, in good order, in full sight, so that the prey could watch it for hours, for days, growing in the sky, swelling from a scatter of dark stars into a sky full of mouths. And in that long watching the prey came to understand, slowly and completely, that no help was coming, and that no god would answer, and that the only thing left in all the world was the waiting. That waiting was the holiest part of the whole rite. The brood did not only eat the body of a world, it ate the hope first, drawn out slow over the long descent, and the hope was the sweetest part of any feast, and the longer it was drawn the sweeter it grew. A small grain hauler ran from earth as the choir came. It was a clumsy fat thing, no weapon on it at all, and it broke from its slow orbit and burned hard for the deep dark, fleeing for its life, its single drive flaring like a frightened heart. The brood let it run. The brood always let a few run. The fleeing ones carried the story of the eating outward into the lanes, and the story ripened other worlds with fear, and fear made the next feast richer, and a world already half broken by terror was a softer and slower thing to take. So Melis Corin watched the little hauler flee, and felt no urgency at all, and even felt a kind of fondness for it, the small frightened thing doing exactly what frightened things were made to do. There was nowhere it could go that mattered. Earth had nothing behind it. The scroll said so, in its honest old glyphs, and the scroll had never once, in 900 years and 40 worlds, been wrong. He settled the cathedral beast into a slow, high orbit above the blue world, and the choir settled around it, 800 living miles of hull, arranging themselves into the patient spiral with the ease of long practice, and Melis Corun prepared to open the first city. He chose it the way a careful eater chooses the first bite, slowly, with relish. A bright, wide city on the edge of a warm sea, soft and full and unguarded, the lights of it just coming on against the turning of the world toward night. The choir warmed in anticipation. 800 living hulls drew breath together, one slow shared inhalation across the whole of the hunger fleet, the long breath before the feast, the breath the brood had drawn above 40 other worlds. And then, from the far side of the small yellow sun, something answered. It did not come as a panic, or a plea, or the wild scattering signal of prey that has finally understood that it is going to die. Melis Corun knew all of those sounds well. He had heard them rise from 40 worlds, and he knew the shape of each one the way a hunter knows the cries of the things it kills. This was none of them. It came as a single low tone, steady and unhurried, neither loud nor soft, and it came carried on a band that the brood used for its own private hymns, the inner band of the choir, the secret throat, the one no outsider had ever found in 900 years of crossing the dark, the one that should have been deaf to the whole of the galaxy. Whoever had sent that tone had been listening to the choir, and had been listening long enough, and close enough, to learn the shape of its most secret voice, and to speak back along it. The tone was patient, it was almost gentle, and it carried one line of human speech, slow and clear, in the trade tongue that the whole arm of the galaxy shared. "You read an old scroll," the human voice said. "Let us write you a new one." Maelus Korun did not understand it. Not yet. He turned the long senses of his cathedral beast toward the far side of the sun, toward the source of that impossible tone, and he searched the empty dark there, the clean black sky where his scrolls and his certainty, and 900 years of unbroken law all agreed there was nothing at all, nothing worth the looking, nothing that could ever matter. Then the far side of the sun lit up. It did not flare, it did not burn. There was no fire and no thunder, none of the violence the brood expected from prey at bay, none of the desperate blaze of a world spending its last weapons. The far side of the sun simply ceased to be empty. Where there had been clean black sky a single heartbeat before, there were now ships, and they were not slow, and they were not few, and not one of them carried grain. They were gray. They were straight-edged and cold and enormous, every line of them deliberate, every surface flat and hard and built, with none of the ridged living curves of the brood, none of the wet warmth, none of the slow muscle. They were machines, in the old true sense, things made by hands and minds and purpose, and they were arranged in a wall, a flat, unbroken wall of hulls that hung across the face of the small yellow sun and kept stretching, far past the bright edges of the sun, far past where the choir's long senses had ever once bothered to look, because the scrolls had promised, in their honest glyphs, that there was nothing out there worth the looking. Each hull bore the same blunt sigil, repeated 1,000 times along the wall, an open hand turned outward, palm forward, fingers spread wide. Later, when the war priests of the brood wrote the true scroll of that day, they would learn it was an old human sign that meant two things at once, both of them at the same time, and that the doubleness was the whole point of it. It meant stop, and it meant we are still here. Maelus Korun counted them, because counting was a holy act in the brood, and a high devourer who could not count his feast was no devourer at all. To count was to know, and to know was to command, and a devourer who looked upon a thing and could not say its number was already half beaten. He counted to 400 dreadnoughts, and the wall was not finished. He counted to 900, and the wall was not finished, and the cold of the deep dark seemed to creep a little way into the warm wet inside of him. He counted to 1,300, and stopped, not because he had reached the end of the wall did not end, the wall went on past the edge of even his long senses, but because the choir, for the first time in 900 years and 40 eaten worlds, did something that it had no doctrine for, something the faith had sworn from its oldest glyph was impossible, something that should never have been able to happen inside one shared and certain and unbreakable mind. It went quiet. A shared mind is not supposed to be able to go quiet. That is its whole promise. That is the gift the brood had carried out of its gray nursery into 40 skies, the thing that made it a power and not a swarm. One will, one voice, no second thought to hesitate, no frightened whisper to spread from hull to hull and become a rout. Maelus Korun had spent 9 centuries trusting that promise, building his whole long life upon it, and now he stood inside the warm, wet dark of his cathedral beast and listened to 800 throats fail to find a single word between all of them, and he understood, far too slowly, that the silence was fear. He crushed it. He was the high devourer, and the will of the choir was his will, and he would not have it spreading panic through hulls that had never in their grown lives known the meaning of the word. He pressed his own certainty out through the shared throat, hard, the way a strong arm presses a deep wound closed before the bleeding can take hold, and he held it there until the warmth came back into the living hulls, and the will steadied, and the terrible quiet broke. And he told them the truth as he had always known it, the truth that had carried the brood through 40 feasts and never once cracked. They are metal, he sang, and made the choir sing it under him, so that the certainty would set into them like cooling shell. Metal is dead, metal does not breathe, and does not hunger, and does not grow. We have eaten metal fleets before, on 3 of the 40 worlds, and metal cracks, and metal burns, and metal lies still and cold when the muscle that drove it is cut. A wall that does not breathe cannot hunger, and a thing that does not hunger cannot win, because only hunger fights all the way down to the last. Count them, if the counting steadies you. Count them, and be unafraid. Then we will eat them, hull by hull, and then we will eat the soft blue world that hides behind them, and we will grow this whole gray wall into milk for the brood, and in 1,000 years, the young ships of Soren will be carved with the milk marks of the day we ate a wall. The choir believed him, because it had no choice but to believe him. That was the strength of the brood, the deepest root of it. And that, though Malus Corin did not yet know it, was also the wound, opening quiet and unseen at the very center of everything he was. The human wall did not advance. That was the first strange thing, and it gnawed at him before a single shot was fired, before the dying began, while there was still time to wonder. Every prey the brood had ever met did one of two things when the hunger fleet filled its sky. It ran, or it charged. Both were forms of fear, the fear that flees in the hope of living one more hour, and the fear that throws itself forward in a rush to get the dying over with quickly. The gray dreadnoughts did neither. They held their line across the face of the sun, perfectly still, perfectly spaced, each hull exactly as far from its neighbors as every other hull along the whole unbroken wall. A thing built and held by something that did not need to fidget, did not need to circle, did not need to do anything at all but be there. And they waited. They waited the way a thing waits when it is in no hurry whatsoever, and knows it down to its bones, the way the host waits in the warm light of his own open door, while the guest comes the long cold way up the road to reach him. Then one ship came forward. It came alone, out of the center of the wall, sliding free of the line and into the open dark between the two fleets, and the rest of the wall closed smoothly behind it, as though it had never been there, as though the wall could lose a hull and not even notice. And the ship that came was not the largest of the dreadnoughts, which insulted Malus Corin more deeply than the wall itself had. They were not even sending their greatest hull to face the high devourer of Soren and his 800. It was a long gray ship, blunt-nosed, broad across the shoulders, scarred down one whole flank, with old deep marks the brood could not read. The marks of fights survived in skies the choir had never seen and could not imagine. On its prow was painted the open hand, larger than on any of the others, and beneath the hand a single word in the human tongue. When the war priests later wrote the true scroll, they would learn the word was tidewall. In the moment, it meant only this: that one cold-built thing had decided to come out alone and stand before 800 living ones, and was not afraid, and wanted the whole choir to see that it was not afraid. A voice came from it, the same patient voice that had crossed the void on the brood's most secret band, the voice that should not have been able to find that band at all. "My name is Commander Isla Wren," it said, "of the Earth Deepwatch Dreadnought Tidewall. You have come a very long way to eat a world that asked nothing of you, that has never heard your name, that does not know, even now, that you are in its sky. Its people are making their evening meals. They are putting their young to sleep. Not one of them is looking up. I am going to give you one chance to turn your fleet around and go home. I do not expect you to take it. None of the others ever did. But I want it written down, in your scroll and in ours both, that the chance was offered before anything else happened in this sky. Turn around, devourer. That is the offer. There will not be a second one." Malus Corin answered the only way the brood knew how to answer an offer of mercy from prey. He laughed, and he made the whole choir laugh with him, all 800 living hulls shaking with it at once, a sound like the grinding of moons, so that the laugh would roll out across every band the human ship could possibly hear, so that the soft-built thing would understand to its core exactly how small and how foolish its offer was. "Little dead boat," he sang, and the choir sang beneath him like a rising sea. "We are the brood choir of Soren. We have eaten 40 worlds, and we have grown our young from the bones of every one of them. We are 800, and we are one mind, and a thing that is one mind does not turn back, because there is no part of it left over to be afraid, and no second voice in it to argue for fleeing. Your wall is a bluff. Your mercy is a bluff. Your one chance is the small, thin sound a frightened thing makes when it has run all the way out of every other sound it has. There is no God under your sea. We looked. We always look. We looked in your deeps the way we look in every world's deeps, and there is nothing there. We read the scroll. We always read the scroll. And the scroll has never once, in 900 years, been wrong." "You did read it," Commander Wren agreed, perfectly calm, not a tremor in the patient voice. It was an honest scroll. We took some trouble to make sure of that. That stopped him, just for a moment. The laughter went out of the choir all at once, like a great tide pulling suddenly back from a shore, leaving the wet dark exposed and cold. Made sure of it. The words turned over in him and would not lie flat. "We let your survey through," she said. 20 of your years ago, we watched it come into the system on its slow gray wings, one small scout beast, and we read it the whole time it was reading us. We could have burned it in the deep dark before it ever caught the light of a single one of our cities, and you would never have known it was lost. Only that one more scout failed to come home from the long crossing, the way scouts sometimes do, the way the dark sometimes simply swallows them. Instead, we let it look. And we made very certain that it saw exactly, precisely, only what we wished it to see. Slow ships, soft cities, no fleet, no god. We have been letting your kind read that particular scroll for a long time now, Devourer. It is how we choose which of you we will finally have to teach, and which of you we can let pass on by toward easier skies. The choir's warmth flickered again, and this time Maelis Corin could not press it flat fast enough, because this time, the cold was not coming from outside the choir. It was coming from inside the certainty itself, rising up through the very faith that should have held it down. "You hit a war fleet," he sang, and he hated the new thing that had crept into his own voice, the thing the brood did not have a word for, the thing that, had they ever owned a glyph for it, would have been called doubt. "We hit a great many things," she said. "Earth has been building since long before you ever pointed a snout in our direction, since long before your scout was even grown. We learned early, far earlier than you would ever believe of a young soft species, what the galaxy does to a world it has decided is defenseless. We did not learn it from books. We watched it happen, again and again, to others. We listened to those others scream across the dark, and we could not reach them, and we could not save them, and we swore over the cold of their dying that it would never be us. And so we made a choice, a very long and patient choice, a choice that took us more of our short lives than your kind would ever think a short-lived people could spend on a single purpose. We chose to become the most defended thing in this whole arm of the sky, and then we chose to hide it, so completely, behind so honest a lie, that no one in all the dark would ever believe it, until the very moment came when believing it could do them no good at all. You are the 11th fleet to read that scroll, Devourer. You are the 11th to come to this sun to feast. None of the other 10 ever wrote home." Maelis Corin felt the slow, high orbit beneath his cathedral beast, as though it had quietly become the inside of a closing jaw, which it had, and had been since the moment 20 years ago, when his own scout brought home the honest lie, and he read it and chose joy over caution, certainty over care. So he did the thing a devourer does when words begin to wound him faster than he can answer them. He stopped the words. He attacked. "Sing the feast," he roared through the choir, and 800 living ships answered him at last, full and loud and glad, because rage was a hymn the brood knew by heart, the oldest and simplest hymn there was, the first song any young ship learned in the milk tides. The hunger fleet broke its slow holy spiral all at once, and turned outward, all of it, every grown hull, every breathing mile of it, and hurled itself across the dark at the gray wall in front of the sun. The mouths opened wide, ring upon ring of teeth gleaming wet in the starlight. The spore throwers along the flanks of the great ships swelled and darkened, ready to vomit out the living plague that drowned a world's air and ate its lungs from the inside. The great barbed lances of the brood, each one the length of a small moon, drew back along their muscle cradles, ready to strike, ready to punch through gray hull and let the cold in. The brood had broken metal fleets before. 3 times in 40 worlds it had met things that were built rather than grown, and 3 times it had ground them under. Metal cracked, metal burned. Metal above all could be surrounded, because metal fleets were always few, and the brood was always, always more. That was the whole doctrine of the feast against the built. Come on in, number. Fold around them from every side at once. Let no single gray hull face fewer than 10 open mouths, and grind them down under the simple, unanswerable weight of being more. It had never once failed. It could not fail. More was more. That was the faith, and the faith was the wound, and the wound was open all the way now, gaping, and Maelis Corin charged straight into it, and could not see it even as it swallowed him. Because the gray wall did not break, and it did not burn, and this was the thing the whole long doctrine of the brood had no answer for, no glyph for, no hymn for. It could not be surrounded. There was always more of it than there was of the brood. In every single direction the choir turned to fold itself. The wall was already there, gray and patient and endless. Open hands turned outward. More hulls than the Hunger Fleet had ever imagined a single world could hold. More hulls than there were ships in the whole of the brood. The brood had come to be the many. It found that it was the few. The tide wall fired first. One shot. The brood expected loud. The brood had learned, on the three metal worlds, that built things died loud, in fire and tumbling wreck, and the bright sudden bloom of burst reactors, throwing their light across the dark. This was not loud. It was a single line of pale light, thin as a thought, thinner, drawn from the prow of the tide wall to the nearest living hull of the charging brood, and it crossed the whole space between them in less time than a heart takes to close once. Where it touched, the great grown ship, a mile-long thing that had helped to empty 3 of the 40 worlds, a hull with milk marks older than the human species, simply stopped being a ship. There was no fire. There was no tumbling wreck. There was no scream that the body could make. The living mile of it came apart along 100 clean seams at once, as though some cold, patient god had drawn one finger down the length of the hull and told it, quietly, to be 200 pieces. And it was. And then the pieces drifted gently apart in the dark, and then the pieces were cold, and there had never been a sound at all. One shot, one ship of the brood, a thing that had eaten cities and grown new broods from their bones, gone in a single quiet heartbeat, into ash that did not even glow. Then the wall fired. Not all of it. The war priests would mark this down above all else, later, in the true scroll, setting it in the glyph with hands that would not stop their shaking. The humans never once used all of the wall. They used what was needed, and not one hull more. The way a careful eater takes exactly the bite the mouth can hold, and not one greedy mouthful past it. Perhaps 200 of the 1,300 dreadnoughts spoke in that first volley. No more. 200 lines of pale, patient light reached out across the closing dark, found 200 charging living hulls, and drew their cold, clean seams, and 200 miles of the brood came apart, and went still, and went cold in the very same shared heartbeat. In the space of one breath, a quarter of everything the brood choir of Soren had ever been was ash, drifting cold and dark above a soft blue world that still, even now, did not know that it was there. And the choir felt every death. That was the thing the doctrine had never, in all its 900 years, prepared them for. It was the price hidden at the very bottom of the gift, the cost folded carefully inside the strength, the wound that had been waiting in the deep shape of the brood from the first day it ever learned to share a single mind. When a ship of the brood died, it did not die alone in the cold dark the way a human crew might die, each in its own small private ending behind its own gray hull. It died inside the shared throat of every other ship at once, screaming, and all 800, now 600, felt the screaming as though it were their own bodies coming apart along their own clean cold seams. 200 deaths poured into the one mind in a single breath. 200 full-throated agonies, with nowhere in the whole of creation to go but inward, down into the shared dark that could not look away from any of them, because it was all of them, because it was each of them, because the strength and the wound were the very same thing. Malus Korun staggered inside the warm, wet dark of his cathedral beast, his own great body convulsing around 200 deaths that were not his and were all of his at once, 200 endings ringing through the whole of him together, and for the first time in his long gray life, he could not find one single clear thought to stand upon. A fleet of separate minds can lose 200 ships, and the survivors can still think, still steer, still aim, still fight on, because each loss lands on its own crew, and the rest can only mourn it from a distance, across the clean, cold gap between one mind and another. A shared mind cannot. A shared mind that loses 200 ships in a single breath, loses 200 ships inside the skull of every single survivor at the very same instant, and for one terrible stretching moment, the brood choir of Soren was not a weapon at all, was not a power, was not the patient eater of 40 worlds. It was one creature screaming in 600 bodies, drowning in its own shared pain, thrashing blind and witless in the dark, with no clear thought anywhere in it to grab hold of and stand. The gray wall, patient, did not press the advantage. It did not pour a second volley into the reeling, helpless choir, though Malus Corin knew, somewhere down beneath the screaming, in the small, cold part of him that was still counting, that it could have ended the whole brood in that single moment of blindness, and not lost a hull doing it. It simply held its line in front of the sun and waited, unmoving, for the screaming to run its course, the way a thing waits for another thing to finish being what it is. That was 200, Commander Wren said, when the worst of it had passed, and the broken choir hung reeling and ragged above the blue world. We have 1,300. I want you to do the arithmetic now, Devourer, the way your own faith taught you to count a feast before you took it. Count what you brought across the dark. Count what you have left. Count what we have here in front of you, and then remember that you have not yet seen the back of it, that there is more of it past the edge of your seeing. And then tell me, on whatever band you care to use, which scroll it is that you believe now. Malus Corin could not answer. For the first time in 900 years, the High Devourer of Sorin had no song anywhere in him at all. He looked down at the soft blue world he had come to eat, the world with no god under its sea, and he finally began to understand the thing the humans had been telling him from the very moment the far side of the sun first lit up. Earth had never needed a god. A god was a thing a world prayed to, because it could not save itself. A story told in the dark by the helpless, to give the helpless something warm to hope toward in the long night. The humans had not waited for a god. They had not knelt and prayed. They had simply, quietly, over long patient years that the brood had spent eating easier worlds elsewhere, made themselves into the thing that did the saving. They were not defenseless. They had never once been defenseless, not on the day the scout came, not on any of the days since. They had only let the galaxy believe it, on purpose, with great and careful effort, and then they had waited, with a wall of dreadnoughts and a single open hand, for the hungry to come and read the scroll and fall. You are the god, Malus Corin whispered, and he meant it for himself alone, in the warm, wet dark of his own cathedral beast, because the choir around him was still screaming and could not hear him. No, said Commander Wren, who heard it anyway, because the humans had been listening to the brood's most private band for 20 years, and knew it now better than the brood knew it itself. We are not anyone's god. We are just the ones who showed up. There is a difference, Devourer, and it is the whole of the difference, and your kind never once learned it in 900 years of teaching worlds that no one would come. A god does not choose to come. A god is a story that is always already there, or always already absent, and either way, it asks nothing of the one who tells it. We chose. We built the wall with our own hands, hull by hull, across 400 years. We crossed no distance to be here, because this is our home, and our hearth and our doorway, and we chose to stand in it, between you and that world. That is not godhood. That is only work. We have done a very great deal of it, more than you can imagine, and that is the only reason we are able to keep doing this. The wall fired again. The second volley took 150 more. It was measured, exactly as the first had been, drawn from the wall with the same cold care. The humans did not erase the brood in a single sweeping stroke, though Malus Corin now understood, with a clarity colder than any pain, that they could have, that the wall could have spoken all at once, and ended the whole hunger fleet in the time it takes a heart to close. They were not in a hurry. They had crossed no distance to come here. The sun was their hearth, and the wall was their threshold, and they were standing in their own open doorway with all the time in the world. The brood had crossed the whole black dark to come and die at it. The humans had the deep patience of the host, and the host is never the one who runs, and never the one who must hurry the matter along, because the host is already home and has nowhere else he needs to be. So they took 150 more living hulls, drew their 150 clean cold seams across the dark, and let the broken choir feel every single one of them pour screaming into the one shared mind. And then they waited again, and the wall hung silent and gray across the face of the sun, and did not gloat, and did not advance, and simply was. Malus Corin tried to think through the screaming. He was the High Devourer of Sorin. He had eaten 40 worlds. Somewhere in the long, deep doctrine of the brood, There had to be a teaching for this, a hymn for the feast that turns against the eater, a way to stand when the ground of the faith itself has begun to give way. He reached down into the oldest teaching there was, the one that had never failed in 900 years, the bedrock under all the rest, and he found, with a horror that went all the way down to the blind animal core of him, that it was the very teaching which had brought him here, and that it was a lie, and had always been a lie, and that the realizing of it was its own kind of death, slower than the clean cold seams, and far deeper, a death that left the body whole and hollowed out the thing inside. The doctrine said, we are more. The doctrine said, a thing that does not breathe cannot win, because only hunger fights all the way to the last. The doctrine said, there is no God under the sea, and a world without a God is meat, and meat does not fight back. Every line of it was ash now, drifting cold and dark above a blue world that still turned beneath the dying, soft and bright and wholly unbothered, its evening cities coming on one by one, its people setting their tables, none of them looking up. So he did the only thing left to him that was not surrender, because the brood had no doctrine for surrender, any more than it had one for fear or for doubt. He tried to flee, and he tried to take the whole choir with him, all of it at once, every surviving hull, away from the gray wall, and back toward the clean dark and the long road home. And in the very trying, he learned the last and the worst lesson of the shared mind, the lesson that had waited at the deepest bottom of the gift for 900 years. A fleet of separate ships can scatter. 800 separate captains, each with a mind of his own, can each turn his own hull on his own thought and run his own way into the dark. And some of them will live, because the prey that breaks and scatters in every direction at once is a hard thing to gather. But the brood choir of Soren was one will, and one will turns one way. Every surviving hull pivoted on the very same thought in the very same instant, all of them together, the way they did everything together, the way the faith had always demanded and the gift had always allowed, and the humans, who had been listening to that one shared will for 20 patient years, who had learned its every turn from the mouths of those who fled it, knew exactly which way it would turn before the thought of turning had even finished forming inside it. The gray wall was already there. It had folded around behind the brood, while the choir screamed, smooth and silent and unhurried, 400 dreadnoughts peeling cleanly off the long line in front of the sun and sliding through the dark to the far side, taking up a new line there, so that when Malus Corin turned what was left of his fleet to run for the deep dark and home, the brood ran straight into a second wall, identical to the first in every line and angle, gray, straight-edged, patient, open hands turned outward, waiting, as though it had stood there all along, as though it had always known, from the beginning of the world, that the choir would one day come this way and try to run. There was no way out. There had never been a way out. The trap had closed 20 years ago, in a survey scroll that the humans had written with their own careful hands for the brood to find and read and believe. And Malus Corin had carried that scroll home himself, across the whole long dark, cradling it like good news, and he had laid it before his gathered choir, and called it good news, and sung the descent. He had been the one to spring the trap. He had sprung it the day he chose to believe. You cannot run a shared mind, Commander Wren said, almost gently now, as the second wall held, and the choir crushed itself against it. We worked that out a long time ago, in the early centuries, when your kind first began to come. It is the strongest thing you have, the gift you carried out of your nursery, and on the day we finally understood what you were, we understood that it would also be the only thing we would ever need to beat you. One mind only ever holds one plan at a time. 800 bodies, one plan, one turning, one road. To fight your brood, we never had to be faster than 800 ships. We only had to learn the one plan, and then be standing, quietly, where that plan was always going to end. We have had 20 years to learn it, Devourer, and 400 to learn your kind. You ran exactly, precisely, where we knew you would run. You could not have run anywhere else. You are one mind. One mind has nowhere else to go. The choir thrashed against the second wall, blind and frantic, and the wall took 80 more, clean and cold and measured, and the 80 deaths poured into the one mind on top of all the rest, the 200 and the 150 before them, and Malus Corin felt his own great will begin to come apart at the seams, the way his ships had come apart, quietly, without fire, into pieces that would not fit back together no matter how he reached for them. He was a devourer. He was the High Devourer of Soren, the Eater of 40 Worlds, the voice of the choir. And he gathered up what was left of himself, the last whole unbroken part of him still standing under the screaming, and he did the thing a devourer must never be reduced to, the thing the doctrine swore in its deepest glyph, that no true devourer could ever, in any extremity, be brought to do. He begged. "Stop," he sang, and he sang it on every band at once, the secret inner band, and the open trade band, and all the war bands between them. Every throat, the brood owned, thrown open together, and there was no roar of the choir beneath it now, no 800 voices rolling like a sea, only one old and frightened creature in the cold ruin of a fleet. "Stop. We will turn. We will go. We will not touch the world. We will not open a single city. We will not lay one egg in your soft blue sky. We will tell them. We will tell all of them, every brood, every hunger in the dark. We will write the true scroll and carry it to every sky that has a name. We will say Earth is not meat. Only stop. Only let what little is left of us live. Only stop." The wall stopped firing. It stopped at once. Both walls. Every dreadnought along both gray lines. The pale, patient light winked out all along them in the very same instant. As one, the way the humans did everything, as one, without ever needing to share a single mind to do it, which was a thing the brood had not known a separate people could do, and could not understand even now. And the silence that came down after was so total, so complete, and so sudden, that Maelis Corin could hear, for the first time in 900 years, the slow, wet beat of his own cathedral beast's living heart, deep in the warm dark, patient and alive. He had expected to die. He had been certain of it, in the small, cold counting part of him. He had not, in any part of himself, expected to be heard. "That," Commander Wren said, "is the first true thing you have said since you arrived in this sky. Now hold this orbit. Do not move a single hull, not one, not a length. And listen, Devourer, because I am only going to explain this to you once, and then I am going to send you home to say it for me, to every sky that will hear you." Maelis Corin held the orbit. And what was left of the brood choir of Soren, 300 and some living hulls out of the 800 that had broken so proudly from the deep dark, every single one of them now carrying the screaming of the dead in the shared dark of its skull, held the orbit with him, motionless, obedient. Because for the first time in all its long gray history, the brood did the one thing it had spent 40 worlds and 900 years teaching weaker peoples to do at the end of every feast. It obeyed. The strangeness of it ran through the whole choir like a cold current. Obedience was a thing the brood demanded. It was not a thing the brood did. In 900 years, no power had ever stood high enough over Soren to be obeyed. Worlds knelt to the brood. The brood knelt to nothing, because nothing in all the dark had ever been larger than its hunger. And now here it hung, 300 broken hulls above a soft blue world, holding an orbit because a gray ship that did not breathe had told it to, and finding, this was the part Maelis Corin could not push away, that the obeying was a kind of relief. To stop, to be told to stop, to be allowed to stop, by a thing that could have made him stop forever, and had chosen not to. There was a strange dark warmth in it that the doctrine had no glyph for, and the war priests, listening through the shared mind, felt it too, and were ashamed of it, and could not let it go. "You think we are cruel," Commander Wren said, and the patient voice did not change at all. "I can hear it on your bands, under the screaming. You think this is cruelty drawn out slow for the pleasure of it, the way your kind draws out a feast, the way you eat the hope before you eat the body. It is not. If we were cruel, you would already be gone, all 800 of you, every hull, in the very first volley, with no wall folding behind you, and no road, and no choices left, and there would be no scroll, and no lesson, and no one alive in all this sky to carry either one home. Cruelty is the easy thing, Devourer. It is the easiest thing in the whole of the galaxy, and the cheapest. We chose the hard thing instead. We chose to take exactly enough of you to make you understand, and not one hull more, and to leave the rest of you alive to learn, and that is far harder than killing all of you, and harder still than killing none. Do not mistake our restraint for weakness. Our restraint is the single most expensive thing we own, and we paid for it across 400 years, and we are paying for it right now, in this orbit. With every hull of yours we are choosing not to kill. The soft blue world turned beneath them, bright and quiet, the world without a god, the world that had not lifted one finger to defend itself in all of this, because it had never once needed to. Maelis Koran looked down at it and understood, fully now, that its defense had crossed half a sun's worth of dark to come and meet him, and was now folded around the dying brood in 2 gray walls, and had not lost a single hull, and had not even troubled to raise its voice. The world slept on. The world did not know. The world had never been the point of its own defense. The wall was the point, and the wall had been ready for 20 years and more. "Here is the new scroll," Commander Wren said. "Write it on whatever your kind writes on. Carve it in the deepest grown glyph you keep, deeper than your hymns, deeper than your law. Earth is defended. Earth has always been defended. We did not become weak so the galaxy would leave us in peace. That is the bargain the soft worlds always try to make in the dark. Kneel low enough, and the hungry will pass you by, and it never once holds, because the hungry always come for the weak in the end. That is the whole of what the hungry are. We did the opposite of the soft worlds. We became the strongest thing in this entire arm of the sky, stronger than your brood, stronger than the 10 fleets that came to this sun before you, and then we hid all of it, every last hull, behind slow grain haulers and soft open cities, and one honest scroll that lied with every true word in it, so that the ones who eat the weak would come and read the lie and find out, far too late to turn, exactly what we are." The choir was silent. It listened in a way it had never in 900 years listened to anything, because for the first time in its long gray life, it was the one being taught, the one on the wrong side of the lesson, the one who had read the scroll wrong. "You are the 11th fleet to read that scroll," she said. "I told you that already, twice now, but I do not think you truly understood it the first times, so I am going to tell you once more, now that you are quiet enough to hear it. 11 fleets, 11 hungers across 400 years that looked at Earth and saw nothing but a table laid and waiting. The first of them came when our wall was small, when our hands were shaking on the work, when we had perhaps 30 hulls, and a great deal of fear and almost nothing else, and we very nearly lost, Devourer. I will tell you that plainly, because it is part of the true scroll, and you should carry it whole. We very nearly lost, but we did not lose. We learned. Each fleet that came to this sun taught us more about how the hungry think and move and break, and each fleet we turned away made the next one easier to meet, and somewhere across those 400 years, we stopped being the world that barely survives and became the world that quietly waits. We are very, very good at waiting now. We are better at it than your brood, and your brood is the most patient eater this whole arm of sky has ever grown out of its dark. We outwaited you. In the end, we have outwaited everyone who ever came." Maelis Koran felt the slow orbit beneath his cathedral beast, and he felt the cold truth of her words settle into him hull by hull, sinking down through the whole reeling choir, like silt settling through still water. He had not been the hunter here. He had never once been the hunter. He had been the prey from the very moment the scout came home 20 years ago and laid its honest lie before him. The slow, holy descent he had savored, the tightening spiral, the patient eating of the hope before the body, all of it, every part of it, had been the brood falling, slow and certain and terribly proud, into a doorway the humans had been holding open for it, across 20 patient years and more. He did the thing a devourer does when he can no longer bear what he is being made to hear, but this time there was no attack left anywhere in him, no rage to sing, no fresh hull to spend against the wall. So instead, for the first time in his 900 years, the High Devourer of Soren asked a question of his prey, and did not know, as he asked it, that the asking was itself the first small beginning of the change the humans wanted. "Why," he sang. It was nearly the whole of the song he had left in him. "Why let us live? We would not have let you live. We did not let the others live, the worlds before you. We came to your sky to eat your world, and grow our young from the bones of it. You have us beaten, you have us begging, and the brood does not beg. Why open a road at all? Why not finish the feast that is yours by every law of the dark?" "Because a dead brood teaches no one," Commander Wren said. That is the whole of it, and it is the hardest thing we know, and we did not learn it quickly or cheaply. For a long time, in the early centuries, when we were still afraid, we did finish the feast. We turned the fleets to ash, every hull of them, and we felt safe for 100 years behind that ash. And then another fleet came that had never once heard a word about us, because we had left no one alive from the last one to carry the word. And we did the whole terrible thing over again, and again. An ash pile grew in front of our sun, fleet upon fleet of it, century upon century, drifting cold and growing. And one day, we stood in our own doorway, and looked at it, and understood that we could keep making ash until the very end of time, and never once be done with it, because there is always another hungry thing somewhere out in the dark that has not yet heard, and never will hear, if the dead cannot speak. We grew tired of Ash Devourer. We have made a very great deal of it, more than any people this side of the galaxy's bright heart, and we are tired of it now, all the way down to the bone. So we try a different thing. We take exactly enough of you to make the lesson land and stay, and we send the rest of you home to carry it. You are not the first we have tried this on, but you eat 40 worlds, and your kind speaks to many skies along the old lanes, and so you may yet be the most useful teacher we have ever caught and let go. A grown ship of the brood, dying slowly, half its hull already cold, sent out one last reflex of hunger, a final ragged spore burst flung toward the nearest gray dreadnought, the blind animal lashing of a thing too broken to think, all muscle and ending, and no will left in it at all. Maelis Corin felt it leave the choir before he could close his own will around it and hold it back. He braced for the answer. He knew the answer. The answer was 200 clean cold seams drawn all at once, and the end of everything that remained of the brood choir of Soren, because that was what walls did when you struck at them. That was the law of walls. The wall did not answer it. A single dreadnought shifted half of its own length to one side, smooth and slow and entirely unhurried, and the ragged spore burst passed harmlessly through the empty dark where the gray ship had been, and out into the deep, scattering and thinning into nothing, and the dreadnought slid back into its exact place in the line, unbothered, the way a grown adult steps once to the side around the swung fist of a child too small even to reach him, not even worth a shot. The humans did not spend a single clean cold seam on the dying twitch of a beaten thing. They had decided how this day would end hours ago, perhaps years ago, perhaps 400 years ago, and a dying ship's last reflex did not change it by so much as a breath, and the sheer untroubled steadiness of that, the certainty of a power so complete that it did not even need to answer a blow thrown straight at it, frightened Maelis Corin more deeply than all the volleys together had. He had met enemies before, across 900 years. He understood enemies. Enemies were hungry, like him, and a hungry thing could be read, and baited, and turned, and at the last beaten, because hunger was a lever, and every hungry thing in all the dark could be moved by the working of that one lever. The humans were not hungry. That was the heart of the whole terrible truth of them, the thing under all the rest. They had everything they needed, and they wanted nothing at all that he had. Not his hulls, not his eggs, not his 40 worlds of milk marks, not even his fear. And so there was no lever anywhere in the whole of him, nothing he could grip and pull, that could move them so much as a finger's width. No threat he could make that they had not already weighed and dismissed. No mercy he could offer that they had any use for. No fear he could feed them to make them flinch and falter. They would do exactly what they had decided to do, no more and no less, and not one breath sooner. And what they had decided to do was let him live, and make him carry the truth home through the dark. Why us? He sang again, smaller now, the question worn down to its bare core. Why this brood, of all the hungers in the dark? There are eaters out there far greater than Soren, fleets beside which my 800 are a single mouthful. Why teach us, and not them? Because you let the children run, Commander Wren said. The choir went very still, stiller than it had been even in the screaming. On every world you ever ate, she said, you let a few of them flee. You have done it 40 times. You told yourself it was mercy, or strategy, or the ripening of fear for the next feast down the lane, and you never once followed them, not one of them, not to see where they went. The brood does not follow its leavings. The brood eats, and grows its young from the bones. and moves on into the dark toward the next soft world. So you never learned where the fleeing ones went, all those long years. I am going to tell you now, Devourer, because it is the most important single line in the whole new scroll, and I want you to carry it home in the very front of your mind, ahead of all the rest. They went to Earth. Malus Corin could not speak. The whole choir, 300 broken hulls, hung silent and motionless in the dark above the blue world and listened, and for a moment, the endless screaming of the dead in the shared skull seemed to quiet and grow still, as if even the dead had turned to listen. Not all at once, she said, and not by any single road, and not in any one lifetime, but over the long, slow years, the broken survivors of your 40 emptied worlds drifted out along the old trade lanes, carrying with them the only thing you had left them to carry, which was the story of what had come and taken everything. The same gray hunger, the same slow descent out of the dark, the same holy tightening spiral, the same patient eating of the hope before ever touching the body, told to us again and again and again, in 40 different tongues, by survivors out of 40 different skies who had never once met one another, and yet described, every one of them, the very same thing coming the very same way. And we listened to every single one of them. We sat with them in the cold and we wrote it all down. We learned the whole shape of you, Devourer, from the mouths of the very ones you let run. You built the thing that beat you today, one fled and frightened child at a time, across 900 years of feasts, and you never once knew, in all that time, that you were doing it. Malus Corin searched the long memory of the choir, the shared deep memory that held 900 years of feasts, and he found them there, the fleeing ones, where he had filed them away as nothing, a grain hauler, burning hard for the dark on the day they opened the cities of a green world. A courier slipping past the spore clouds of a desert world, a battered colony barge running from a world of ice, packed to its hull with the young and the old, the ones too slow to be worth chasing. 40 worlds, a handful from each. He had watched every one of them flee and felt nothing but the small, fond pleasure of a thing going as it should. He had thought of them, when he thought of them at all, as seeds of fear scattered for the next feast. He had never once thought of them as witnesses. He had never thought of them as anything that could speak, or remember, or carry, or build. They had been all of those things. They had been the most dangerous things in the whole long story of the brood, and he had let them go 40 times with his own will, gladly, because the doctrine said, the fleeing ones served the feast. We have a record of every one of them, Commander Wren said, and her voice was not unkind now, only steady, only true. Names, where we could learn them, the worlds they came from, the days you came, the things they saw. We keep them in a hall on Earth, a long quiet hall, and we read them aloud, all of them, once each turning of our world around its sun, not to feed a hatred. We are not a hating people. Hatred is another kind of hunger, and we starved ours out a long time ago. We read them so we do not forget why the wall is there. Every hull of that wall has a name from your 40 worlds carved somewhere on it, Devourer. The tide wall carries the name of a world you called a feast, and we call a grief. When I fired on you, I fired with that name under my hand. I want you to know that. Not as a threat, as the truth. You should carry the whole of the truth home, and that is part of it. The choir, 300 broken hulls, held that in its shared and aching skull, and could not answer it, because there was no answer in any glyph the brood had ever grown. The fleeing ones had names. The wall had their names. The thing that had beaten the brood was built out of the brood's own leavings, raised up out of everything it had thrown away as worthless, and it had been raised not in rage but in patience, and that was the part Malus Corin could not hold and could not put down. Malus Corin had eaten 40 worlds, and he had let a few flee from every one of them, and he had called it mercy, and called it strategy, and called it the ripening of fear, and he had never once, in 900 years, asked where the fleeing ones went. The brood did not follow its leavings. The brood ate, and grew its young from the bones, and moved on into the dark toward the next soft world and the next honest scroll. The leavings had gone to Earth, all of them. Every fled child of every emptied sky had drifted, sooner or later, along the long trade lanes toward the one world that listened, and the one world that listened had become, slowly and on purpose, the one world that no brood could ever eat. The humans had not built 1,300 dreadnoughts because they feared dying. Melis Korun understood that now, all the way down. A species that feared dying would have hidden, or fled, or bought peace with tribute, the way the soft worlds always tried to. The humans had done none of those things. They had heard, again and again across 400 years, the same gray hunger described in the same gray terms by survivors who came from 40 different skies, and they had decided, with the cold patience of a people who plan in centuries and keep their plans through the deaths of the ones who began them, that when the hunger finally came to read Earth's scroll, it would be the last scroll that hunger ever read. "You made us," Commander Wren said, and now Melis Korun heard the whole weight folded into the two small words. "Every world you emptied built a piece of that wall you are looking at. Every child you let run taught us a line of your faith, a turn of your tactics, a way that your one mind moves. We did not hunt you across the sky, Devourer. We never had to. We are the most patient thing your kind has ever met, more patient than your brood by far, and we simply made ourselves into the one world in the galaxy you could not bear to pass by, and then we waited for you to come to us. You read the scroll 20 years ago. You have been falling toward this orbit ever since. You only thought you were the one doing the choosing." Melis Korun thought, then, of the survey scout he had sent 20 years ago, the small gray beast he had pushed out into the dark with such certainty, and of how it had come home so easily, so unharmed, so full of good news. He had praised it. He had honored it before the whole nursery. He had never once asked himself why a survey of the most defended world in the arm of the sky had returned without a single mark on its hull, when scouts sent to far weaker worlds came home torn, or did not come home at all. The ease of it had been the warning, and he had read the ease as a blessing. The humans had not even needed to hide hard. They had only needed him to want the lie badly enough not to question the gift. "You let our scout go home whole," he sang, slow with the understanding. "You could have torn it. You could have sent it back wounded and afraid, and we might have wondered. Instead, you sent it back happy." "We sent it back happy," Commander Wren agreed. "A frightened scout makes a careful devourer. A happy scout makes a confident one. We did not want you careful, Devourer. We wanted you confident. We wanted you to come at us with all 800 and your whole proud certainty, so that when the certainty broke, it would break completely, and the lesson would have somewhere deep to land. A small fleet of 100, hedging and wary, learns nothing it can carry. You learned everything. You will carry all of it." The brood choir of Soren, 300 broken hulls above a soft blue world, understood at last the full size of the thing it had done to itself, and the understanding was worse than the screaming. It had spent 900 years teaching weak worlds that no god was coming to save them. And it had been right. No god had ever come for those 40 worlds. But the children of those worlds had come for the brood, with 1,300 gray dreadnoughts and a single open hand, and that was worse than any god, far worse, because a god you could pray to, and a god might spare you out of love, and a god might be moved. The humans were not a god, they were merciful out of choice, which was a colder and a steadier and a more terrible thing than love, and they had shown the brood exactly how steady that choice was by stopping the instant it begged, and not one breath sooner, and not one breath later. "Now you go home," Commander Wren said. "All 300 of you, we will let you leave. We will even let you leave together, as one mind, as one choir, because we want the whole of you to carry this. Every hull, every throat, every shared and screaming skull. You will go back to Soren. You will tell the rest of your brood what you found at the world without a god. You will write the true scroll, and you will carve it in the deepest glyph you keep, and you will make very sure that every devourer who comes after you reads it, all of it, before they ever point a snout at a soft blue world again. That is the price of the road we are opening. That is the whole price. Carry the truth, and live." Melis Korun held the orbit a long moment, 300 broken hulls hanging above a world that still did not know they were there, and he searched himself for the thing a devourer was supposed to feel at the end of a feast, the warm, full certainty, and found only the cold and the screaming, and a question he had never once thought to ask in 900 years. He had spent his whole long life believing that strength was the size of a fleet and the depth of a hunger. He had been wrong about both. The strongest thing he had ever met was a thing that did not hunger at all, and it had beaten him, not with a larger fleet, but with 20 years of patience and a single honest lie, and it was now choosing, freely, to let him go. "I do not understand mercy," he sang, quietly, only to her. "It is not in our glyphs. We have a word for the leaving of a few alive to spread fear. We do not have a word for this. For letting the beaten one live, because his living is worth more than his dying. Teach me the word." "We do not have a single word for it either," Commander Wren said. "We have a great many words, and we argue about them, and we get them wrong, and we try again. That is most of what it is, Devourer. The arguing, and the getting it wrong, and the trying again. A thing with one mind cannot do it, because there is no one in it to argue with. Perhaps that is the first thing your brood will have to grow, if it ever wants the word. A second voice. Something in you that can say wait and be heard. You have one now, for the first time. You use it." The two gray walls began, slowly, to open. They peeled back from around the broken choir, dreadnought by dreadnought, smooth and silent and in perfect order, opening a long clear road into the deep dark, back the way the Hunger Fleet had first come. Melis Koran searched the road for a trick, with every sense his cathedral beast still had, because the brood always searched for the trick, because in 900 years, no power had ever opened a road that was not the jaw of a deeper trap. There was no trick. He searched, and there was nothing but open dark and the long road home. The mercy was real. The humans were letting him go. He turned the 300 surviving hulls of the brood choir of Soren, every one of them carrying 500 dead inside the shared dark of its skull, toward the open road. And before he began the long fall home, he did one last thing, because he was still, even now, even beaten, the High Devourer, and a devourer does not leave a sky without a word. "You will regret this," he sang, and even as he sang it he did not believe it, and he could hear in the human silence that she did not believe it either. "We will grow again. The brood always grows again. You let 300 of us live, and 300 can become 800, and 800 can become 2,000, and one day we may come back to this sky with a wall of our own." "I hope you do come back," Commander Wren said, and there was no fear in it at all, only that same patient steadiness. "Not with a wall, with a question. That is the whole reason we let you live, Devourer. We are not trying to end the brood. We are trying to change what the brood is. And a thing that has been one shape for 900 years does not change in a day, or in a single beaten fleet. But it can begin. You begin it. You go home, and you carry the truth. And maybe your grandchildren's broods come back to this sun, not to feast, but to ask. And on that day there will be no wall, because there will be no need of one. That is what we are building toward. It is a longer plan than the wall ever was. We are good at long plans. Go home, Melis Koran. Begin it." And the High Devourer turned his broken choir toward the dark, and began the long fall home. For a long while, as the blue world shrank behind them, and the wall held its place across the face of the sun, Melis Koran watched the dreadnoughts in the long senses of his cathedral beast, waiting still, against all the evidence, for the trick to spring. He watched until the wall was only a gray thread across a yellow star, and then only a memory of a thread, and then nothing at all, and still it did not move, still it did not fire, still it simply let him go. The humans did not even follow to be sure he left. They did not need to be sure. They knew exactly which way one mind would turn, and they had pointed it home, and home was where it would go. Their certainty about him was deeper than his certainty about himself had ever been about anything. He had been read, completely, from the first day to the last, and he had never once read them at all. The long fall took the brood choir of Soren 9 of Earth's years, and Melis Koran spent every one of them learning to live inside a wound that would not close. The shared mind did not heal the way a single mind heals. There was no quiet corner of it to set the pain down in, no second voice to take a turn carrying the weight. 500 deaths lived in every surviving hull, and every survivor felt all 500, all the time, for 9 years, the clean cold coming apart of half an empire replaying without end, in the one throat that could never look away from it. By the time the small gray world of Soren rose at last in the dark ahead of them, the choir had been changed all the way down to its oldest glyph. It was quieter now. It listened before it sang. It had learned, At the cost of 500 ships and 900 years of certainty, the one thing the humans had been trying to give it from the very first low, patient tone across the void. It had learned that it could be wrong. The brood had no word for that, before. They had to build one. The war priests, writing the true scroll with hands that had finally stopped shaking, set it down in the oldest grown glyph the brood still kept, and the glyph meant, as near as the trade tongue could ever carry it, the world that was stronger than its silence. It became the name they used for Earth, and after Earth, for any world that wore its weakness like a cloak thrown over a wall. Malus Korun brought the new scroll before the full brood choir of Soren. Every grown ship of the deep nursery gathered into one great orbit above the gray homeworld, and he did not soften a single line of it. He had been a devourer who softened nothing his whole long life, and he would not begin with the one truth that mattered most. He told them all of it. The far side of the sun lighting up, the wall that did not breathe and could not be surrounded, and went on past every edge of looking. The 200 clean cold seams of the first volley, and the screaming, and the second wall folded in behind a will that could only ever turn one way. The begging, and the stopping, the way the humans had stopped the very instant he asked, because they had never wanted ash at all, only to be understood. He told them the hardest part last, because it was the part the brood least wanted to hear, and most needed to. We were not strong, he sang to the gathered choir, and the homeworld's nursery hung silent around him. We were only early. For 900 years, we ate worlds that had not yet learned what they could do, and we called the eating strength. It was never strength, it was timing. We came to those worlds before they had built their walls, and we mistook a sleeping thing for a dead one, every single time. Earth was not sleeping. Earth had heard us coming for 20 years, and far longer than that. Earth had heard us coming in the voices of every child we ever let run, from every world we ever ate. And in all that time, while we feasted, Earth built. The galaxy thought Earth was meat. So did we. We were the 11th hunger to think it. We are the first the humans ever let live to say that we were wrong. The choir was silent in the new way it had learned to be silent, which was a listening silence now, and not a frightened one. There were some in the gathered nursery, old hulls and proud ones, who wanted to sing against him, who wanted to call the human wall a single trick that could be answered with a cleverer trick, who wanted to grow the brood larger and faster, and return to the small yellow sun with 2,000 hulls, and drown the wall under the old true law of more. Malus Korun let them sing. He did not crush them the way he had once crushed every doubt in the choir, because he had learned, in 9 cold years, that a doubt crushed is a doubt that comes back, and a doubt heard is a doubt that can be answered. So he heard them. And then he asked them the only question that mattered, the one the humans had handed him on the long road home. How many hulls, he sang to the proud ones, do you think they kept past the edge of our seeing? We counted 1,300, and the wall did not end. How many did we not count? How many more walls does a world build that has spent 400 years building, and learning, and waiting? You wish to bring 2,000. They turned 800 with 200. Bring 2,000, and they will turn it with 500. And we will lose 1,700 instead of 5, and we will have taught them nothing, except that we did not listen. The way to win against the world that does not hunger is not to be larger, it is to stop being hungry. That is the only road they left open, and I have walked it home for 9 years, and I am telling you, it is the only one. The proud ones went quiet, not crushed. Convinced, or near enough, which was a thing the brood had never once done before, persuaded a hull instead of commanding it, and the doing of it was strange and slow and felt, to Malus Korun, like the first turning of a vast grown thing toward a new sun. They could have ended us, Malus Korun said. I want that carved in the deepest glyph we keep, deeper than the new name for Earth. 1,300 dreadnoughts, and they used 200, and they stopped the instant I begged, and they opened a clear road, and let 300 of us fall home for 9 years, carrying nothing but the truth. That is not weakness, and it is not mercy, as we have ever known mercy. It is something we do not have, and have never had. They want nothing from us. They have everything they need. A thing that wants nothing from you cannot be bought, and cannot be threatened, and cannot be made to flinch, and that is the one thing in all the dark the brood was never built to fight. So we will stop trying to fight it. We will learn it instead. We will become, if it takes us another 900 years, a thing that can stand in front of its own son and want nothing, and choose mercy, and mean it. And the brood of Soren, which had eaten 40 worlds, did the thing it had never done in all its long gray history. It changed. Not all at once, and not easily, and not without the old hunger clawing at the new resolve for many long years after, in the deep of the nursery, in the dark before the singing. But the true scroll went out from Soren along the trade lanes, the very lanes the fleeing children of 40 emptied worlds had once carried their grief along, and now the lanes carried this one in the other direction, outward, to every sky that would hear. The scroll said, "There is a world with a small yellow sun, and it is not meat." It said, "It wore its weakness as a cloak, and under the cloak was the strongest wall in this whole arm of the sky, and it let us read a lie, so that it could teach us a truth." It said, in the deepest grown glyph of all, the one carved last and carved deepest, "Do not point a snout at the blue world. It will offer you one chance to turn. Take it. It is the only fleet in all the dark that offers the chance at all, and it is the only fleet that has never once needed to." Far away, around the small yellow sun, the 1,300 dreadnoughts of the Earth Deepwatch stood down from the wall and returned to the long quiet patrols they had kept for longer than the brood had been falling toward them. They did not celebrate. There had been no battle to celebrate, by their plain flat reckoning, only a hungry thing taught and sent home, only ash they had chosen not to make. Commander Isla Wren brought the dreadnought Tidewall back to its station at the cold edge of the system, and logged the encounter in the plain flat words the Deepwatch used for everything, the same words for a turned fleet as for a quiet day. 800 ships arrived, 300 departed, 1 empire taught. No human losses. The blue world had never once been in danger, and had never even known the brood was in its sky, because the wall had stood between, the way the wall always stood between, the way it had been patiently built across 400 years to stand. That was the thing the galaxy never understood about Earth, and the thing the brood choir of Soren came to understand at the cost of 500 hulls and 900 years of certainty, too late to ever be the same, and just in time to never make the mistake again. A world that builds gods to save it stays weak, because it waits to be saved, and the waiting is the weakness. A world that builds the wall instead, that decides, in its long quiet centuries, that no one is coming, and so it will become the one who comes. That world is the most dangerous thing in all the sky, and the most patient, and, in the strangest and coldest way, the kindest, because it has nothing left to fear, and so it can afford to be merciful. And it has everything it needs, and so it can afford to teach. And it is stronger than its silence, and so it can afford to let a beaten empire fall home across 9 long years, carrying a single new line of scripture in its gray and quieted throat. The galaxy thought Earth was defenseless. The dreadnoughts of humanity answered, the way they had always answered, the way they had built themselves over 400 patient years to answer, not with the panic of the prey, and not with the roar of the predator, but with a wall across the face of the sun, an open hand turned outward, a single low patient tone across the void, and one offered chance that no hungry thing ever took, until the day a high devourer of Soren finally did. He took it. He turned. He went home. And he told them all.